center. So our three things we talked about. What were the three things we talked about? We talked about mean, median, and mode. So mean was our average. And so we add everything up and divide it by the number of things we have. That's your average. And then your median is you arrange your numbers from lowest to highest, your middlemost number. And then does anyone remember what mode is? Aria?
The most repeated number.
Yeah, the most repeated number. So those are all measures of center. Today we're going to do, again, something with measures of center, but it's called standard deviation. So standard deviation has a big, long formula, which I'm not going to bore you with. We're just going to have what the definition of standard deviation is. So everybody, I want you to read along the first sentence with me. So the standard deviation of a data set is how much a value in the data set differs from the mean. What does it mean? Like, have you ever heard of something that you deviate from something? Like you deviate from your path? That means you're going off of your path. Does anybody know what a deviant is? Like if you call someone a deviant? Yeah, they're out of, like you would call like, they're out of the average or they're not normal. If you deviate from the normal, call that deviation. So what standard deviation does, it takes, okay, we're going to find our middle point, then we're going to figure out on average how different are we from the middle. And there's a few steps that we're going to do this. And then we'll just, it's basically filling in a big chart. Your first step is to find the mean. We have a symbol for mean, we call it X bar. It's just an X with a bar on top of it. Not X box, X bar. And this is your mean value. So we figured out how to calculate that on Friday. So here's your math joke for the day. If you really like to watch movies and you really like math, you may watch Mean Girls. Get it? Mean Girls? That's right. So you'll find your mean, and then your next step is you find your deviation of each data value. So to find your deviation, you take your value x minus your mean. Then you square the deviation. So the number you got from step 2, you square it. So you multiply by itself. Step 4 is then we find the mean. So we find another average of all of our squared deviations. So all the numbers from part 3, we'll find the mean of that. And then that is called the variance. We take the square root of the variance, then we get the standard deviation. So the chart plus the steps makes it super easy. So let's look down at our charts. Each chart has all the charts are the same. They each have the same 4 headers. Your first column has just an X in it. This is where you're going to list all of your X values. So down here in our problem, we surveyed how much Two Rivers students work out each day. So down here, these are all our X values, and this is what we put into our first column. So you'll list in here, you'll put, it doesn't matter the order you list them in. You'll do 2, 3.5, 3.5, 1.5, 1, 3, 2.5, 2, 1, and 1. Our second column that we have is our X bar. So this is where we're going to put in our mean. Our mean is going to have the same number all the way down, because our mean is always going to be the same for our data set. So to find our X bar value, what we have to do is add up all of these values together. So do 2 plus 3.5 plus 3.5. You just missed it. I told him the joke. Nobody laughed.
It wasn't funny.
They weren't fans.
Oh.
Writing 2.1 in each slot. Don't just draw like an arrow down. If you have it in each row, it'll help a lot with your calculations. So 2.1. So now in our third column, the column header is really our instructions of what to do. You take your x value minus your x bar value for each row. So we're going to do 2 minus 2.1. So 2 minus 2.1 is negative 0.1. And at the same time, since we're doing that on our calculator, we're going to do our last step as well in this row. So if you do this on your calculator and you just hit the answer, you'll get your, you can save the answer in there. So you do ANS squared. You don't have to type this in again. But we're taking negative 0.1 times negative 0.1, so we'll get a positive number, and it'll be 0.01 in this column. Then we'll take 3.5 minus 2.1. We'll get out 1.4, and then we square 1.4. So we take 1.4 times 1.4, we get 1.96. Get what? By squaring this number. 1.4 times 1.4, 1.96. So we do our third row is the same as the row above it, so we can just copy down again. This is going to be 1.4. So let me write 1.4. And again, this will be 1.96. So we do our next row. 1.5 minus 2.1 is negative 0.6. And then we square that to get 0.36. So our next row, we take 1 minus 2.1. You get out negative 1.1. And then whatever number you get out, you multiply it by itself, or you square it. So negative 1.1 times negative 1.1 will go in your next column over. So that would be 1.21. I'll go through and fill these in a little bit faster. This one's 0.9, 0.81. 2.5 minus 2.1, that's 0.4. And when that is squared, we get 0.16. This is negative 0.1. And we square it, this will be 0.01. This is negative 1.1. This is again a repeat, so you can just copy it down from a previous row. So this is something you need to get comfortable doing on your calculator, going through and practicing, taking these numbers, subtracting it, and then squaring it. That's all you're doing. Once your table is filled in, you just have 2 more things to do. You're going to find the mean of your 4th column. So everything in this row, this column we're going to add together. So we're summing everything here together. So we're adding 0.01 plus 1.96 plus 1.96 plus 0.38. So what I like to do to remind myself what I have to do is I'm finding the sum of all these numbers. I add like a little box underneath. So when I add all those up together, you'd get 8.9. With that 8.9 right now in like the steps, right now we're on step 4. We have to find the mean of all of our square deviations. So we're taking now this 8.9 divided by 10 because that's going to give us the mean of the yellow highlighted row column. Keep getting columns and rows mixed up. 8.9 divided by 10. So this is just like moving the decimal place over. So it's 0.89. We call this number our variance. We divide by 10, just like why we divided by 10 to start, because there's 10 data values. Then to find your standard deviation, sometimes we abbreviate it as StanDev. Like 2 people named Stan, the other person's named Dev. We take the square root of our variance. So we take the square root of 0.89. And then we can round that to the nearest hundredth. So 0.94 would be your standard deviation for your problem. Here's everything. Take the square root of 0.84. Sorry, 0.89. You get the square root, 0.94. So what this is saying is, so this is the average difference there is from our mean. So that means everybody more or less is 1 hour off of the mean of how many hours you exercise per week. You may be thinking, oh, Mr. Scully, when am I ever going to do this? In this class, and then when you move on, you'll do it on a computer or a calculator or something. But it's good we're just focusing on going through and doing these steps and understanding that standard deviation is another way that we can measure the center of things. There's a lot of on the big calculators, you just put in a few buttons and then it does all of this for you. But it's nice, if you have a lot of data values, like say we had 20 of these, you don't want to do 20 of them by hand. So that's where your computer comes in handy. But since we're only doing 10 or so, we can do it by hand. On the homework, the backside is even shorter. There's only 4 data sets you got to put in. So on the homework by one kind of thing is round everything to the nearest hundredth. So you get a long decimal, you should only have 2 decimal places after it. And otherwise, the first half of the homework is just stuff from today. The back half has some review mixed in.